The hours are ticking down until Arsenal return to Champions League action to follow up a impressive victory in Portugal last time, with Mikel Arteta facing the media today, unknowingly to give us all of the information we could ever ask for from any Arsenal manager of all time. I'm sure he's going to give us all the fine details and more as we discuss today in today's Arsenal transfer show. Damn, I messed that up. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Joining you every morning at 8 a.m. UK time as we continue to build and lead up to that January transfer window. Good morning to those joining us live in the chat box. Very much appreciate you all being here. Black Shy, Matt G, Barry, Arasilki, Amira, Damien, Errol, Jamil, Amesy, Glenn, Obelix, Temi, Chima, Natty Tom, Mark, Rowan. We've got Loga and Stephen and Yui and Black Shine and Carlton, Jitty. Paul as well, Gary, Emmett, Stevie, Morgie, Trevor, Dan, Paul, and plenty more of you guys and girls. Thank you, as always, for tuning in. Hugely appreciated. And I hope you've had a really, really good start to your week as well. I had a great day off yesterday. Just enjoyed some chill. Did some jobs, did some house chores, ticked the things off the list that the missus has given me to do. Managed to get what's called a gait analysis. I don't know if anyone's heard about this before. No, it's not checking your garden gate and seeing if it's the right one. It's looking at the inside of your foot to see what type of running shoe suits you. Yes, you can tell that I'm getting ready for those New Year's resolutions, can't you? Well, turns out I've got a slightly smaller right foot than my left foot. As they say, one's usually bigger than the other. Anyway, less said about that. More into Arsenal, of course. Let's jump into today's stories. Please make sure you drop a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new around here with those notifications turned on, so you never miss a show. We kick off with the last of the week's Premier League action in what was called the Sakiko, because either of the two managers involved in West Ham's game against Wolves was under significant pressure, with either of them facing a potential boot if they indeed did lose. And it was Gary O'Neill on the end of the defeat. So far, no news about whether or not he will face the sack after this result. But West Ham winning 2-1 against Wolves to give Julian Lopetegui quite the boost in the hope that he would stay to the foreseeable future. Thomas Souček and Jared Bowen on the goals for West Ham, whereas Matt Doherty was the 69th minute goal scorer. Absolutely zero relevance to the minute there, but I just felt the need to bring it up. Was the scorer to equalise at the time before that Bowen goal late on. Mario Lemina completely losing his head as well, and completely losing his mind at full time, getting into something of a scrap with Jared Bowen. But there was again some very big VAR controversy. Wolves feeling very much hard done by in a number of penalty claims, and looking at both of them, you can absolutely understand why. Emerson fouling Gonzalo Guedes, and also Mavropanos bringing a Wolves player down as well. And it's I don't understand how either of them aren't penalties. And it's Wolves again. Like, Wolves feel as though they continually get battered by VAR, and I'm not seeing those decisions go the right way. And yes, it was a very disappointing result, and one that Gary O'Neill will be certainly pointing to in the post-match analysis and post-match words. And once again, VAR really doing a job to screw Wolves. You can't say anything else other than that reality. Anyway, moving into more Arsenal-specific news, the Arsenal women have drawn against Bristol City in the Women's FA Cup. Of course, Arsenal will have hope of trying to progress through as far as they can in the competition after, of course, their previous rounds and their previous successes in the tournaments. But we want to get trophies, because the Conti Cup has kind of dominated Arsenal's the trophy cabinet for the last few years in the women's game, where they've not been as competitive in the WSL, the Women's Champions League, and they do enter the competition at this stage in the fourth round as well. Manchester United have been drawn against West Bromwich Albion. Chelsea play Charlton, the Ch-Ch derby, and Liverpool play West Ham. Manchester City involved against a club yet to be decided. But that's the FA Cup news for the women's team. And the arguably probably the biggest news of football yesterday was surrounding David Coote, because after the investigation and a kind of thorough look into all of the evidence, the PGMOL have taken the decision to sack David Coote. He will no longer be a Premier League referee, and I imagine his officiating career is probably over at this level, off the back of that video where he was seen saying some pretty derogatory things about Liverpool, about Jurgen Klopp, and as a result has now seen his time as a referee come to a close. It is said that he is receiving support in the aftermath of course, this situation, which I know some people feel that he doesn't deserve. I think from a mental health standpoint, it's certainly important that he does get that support. But he is indeed no longer a referee at Premier League level. But the main kind of story surrounding Arsenal yesterday, ahead of some of the stories to do with tomorrow's game, is some quotes from William Saliba, who was speaking to the media in the aftermath of the game at the weekend. He said, if me and Gabriel want to be all-time great defenders where everyone remembers us, we have to win some trophies. We haven't done it yet, but we will give everything to achieve that. Of course, adding that pressure, adding that expectation, adding that fear, I think maybe even for some, that either of them could leave in search of trophies in the future. Well, of course, it's not lost on any of them. I don't think it's lost on any player. I think any player, of course, wants to win trophies. And I think there is a belief that, of course, that can happen with Arsenal. But if it isn't the case in the next couple of years, of course, that fear that they may leave in search of trophies could grow. But as Arsenal continue to be amongst the title conversation and also amongst the other cup competitions conversations as well, of course, that will help, I think, Arsenal, enable them to convince them to stay for the long term as contract talks go on. There's a lot of optimism around Gabriel's contract situation at the moment, so hopefully that will be showcased in any potential renewal we hear about very soon. And lastly, Mikel Arteta will indeed face the press today ahead of Arsenal's game against Monaco tomorrow in the Champions League. We've seen, as we know, ahead of these Champions League games, that there are open training sessions. Now, these open training sessions don't always tell us everything that we've come to expect from who is and who isn't available for the team. However, sometimes they can give something of a glimpse and an insight into that Mikel Arteta is unable to hide from us. So we're looking for players like Gabriel. We're obviously looking for Calafiori, potentially looking for Tomiyasu, although I think that would be very, very surprising to see him there. Zinchenko, of course, who missed the game at the weekend as well. We're still waiting. We're still hoping that both of them will be available for the game. But then Mikel Arteta will face the press as well this afternoon. I think it's this afternoon. I will double check that for you. But of course, to give an update on those players and the game against Monaco is not an easy game. It is a game that Arsenal will be expected to win, but certainly one that can't be guaranteed. The training session will be early afternoon. The press conference is not until 3:30 this afternoon, so quite a late one actually from a Arsenal press conference perspective. So I guess we'll have to wait and see and get an update on that now and into the future. Right, let's go to part 2, the Advent Calendar and your questions right after this. Okay, this is part 2 of the show where we tackle some of your questions and more in the chat box. This day's shirt, as you can see, is a 20. I was actually looking back and I was thinking, I put it on this morning. I was like, I haven't worn this in a long time. And it's feeling particularly tight. And the missus turned around and said, it's so tight that I can indeed see your nipples through the shirt, which was a wonderfully empowering moment as a man, which I enjoyed very much. But I look back at when I know which year this was, because on the back of this shirt is a certain Marco Asensio, I don't know if you can see that. Of course, who was for a long time one of my favourite players in the world and spending time on loan at Espanyol from Real Madrid. And indeed, he spent that time on loan at Espanyol during the 2015-16 season. So this shirt is 9 years old, believe it or not. And it does feel 9 years old. It's certainly a wake-up call, perhaps, as to what your body was like. To be fair, I do remember it still being quite a tight shirt back in 2015. I think I may have got a size a little bit too small when it came to this shirt. But it is a nice one, and Espanyol are what I would describe I'd describe as an Espanyol kind of follower in terms of Spanish football. I would say they are my Spanish team as well, and that was all inspired by that loan spell that Marco Asensio spent while on loan from Real Madrid. Advent calendar, 10th today, so we're only 15 days away from Christmas. Number 10, bottom right-hand corner, where I finish usually all of my clinical strikes when I'm playing football. And it's a dairy milk. Happy days. I've got very lucky this year, I have to say. Not many whole nuts. Mostly dairy milks or dairy milk truffles. Very few anything else. Sometimes dairy milk caramel. But this has been a very successful advent calendar, I have to say, so far. Very few poor results we have got from this one. So happy days indeed. Right, let's jump into the chat and tackle some of your questions. Soph says, which foot of yours is the bigger one, the left or the right one? As I mentioned at the start, I think my left's slightly bigger. I don't know what that means spiritually. But yes. Farouk in the chat box earlier on said Arteta out. He was asked by several of you guys who he would choose to replace, and Farouk said it's not my job to find Arteta's replacement. I don't get paid the big bucks. The people in the people in the club need to do their job and find someone better, like Liverpool did with Slot. And I love this reply because I don't know if you saw my tweet yesterday on social media, because our good friend at Latte Firm, FK, tweeted this out. Actually tweeted out about the let me find it for you, because it absolutely predicts Farouk's response to your questions, and it's perfect. So FK tweeting out yesterday saying, those of you are hashtag Arteta out, who comes in? The first two replies to this tweet are these two. The first, of course, for those listening on audio, you can't see this, I'll read it to you. The first two replies, the first one from Noski, who says, what's your point? There's a lot of good coaches out there. And then the second one is from AFC Montana, who says, is it my job or the board of directors to find a new coach? And I thought this was the most perfect representation of kind of the Arteta out crowd's inability to actually have kind of an answer to their own questions. And I just thought it was the most perfect kind of moment. Because the irony, of course, was that both Arne Slot, as I talked about, and if you haven't watched my show with Sophie yesterday, do go over to the Highbury Squad and catch up on yesterday's show. We were talking for well over an hour. It was a really good conversation. So I recommend you go and do it. But we talked a bit about Chelsea and Liverpool right now. We talked about the irony that none of the people that wanted to see Arteta sacked would have said that Slot or Enzo Maresca should have indeed been selected. And while those people say it's not my job, it's the board of directors' job, the board of directors are the ones that picked Arteta, who people aren't clearly happy with is doing the job that they're doing. So why on earth would you trust them to make that decision again and not have your own opinion on who you would bring in? The irony is great. It is absolutely hilarious. And I'm still very much enjoying it every single day. Joey says, Tom, they say it's not my job to search the replacement, but it is also not their job to sack Arteta. And it's amazing, isn't it? They're more than happy to sit here and have an opinion on the fact that he should be sacked, but they can't come up with an opinion on who should ultimately replace him. Chance says, these Football Managers fans are so funny. Always got something to say, but no resolution or answers. Indeed. Muvia says, Tom, I feel that Arteta is 1 year behind in player signings. What do we think? I mean, we used to say that Arteta and Arsenal were ahead of schedule, didn't we? So it's amazing how we've gone back. I think that ultimately the summer, as we've talked about at length, simply did not present itself with the options that we wanted. And yet, despite that, they still ended up spending more money on players than both Man City and Liverpool did. sadly, those players that we've signed have been significantly impacted by the injuries that we have been unfortunately suffering across the board as well. Cardi says, we spoke about this during pre-season, but if the players with the quality of the Gab, but just quality of Gab and Saliba are still here without a trophy, you can't blame them for turning heads when clubs like Madrid are then interested. John says, do the Arteta outlaw not realise that if he goes, so does our set-piece coach and his assistant manager along with all the other staff as well? So we won't just be replacing one, but you replace the entire backroom staff. Honestly, though, John, I don't think they'll care. I don't think they'll care at all. Paul says you will roll the dice with any manager that you bring in. Chris says it's shocking that people still want Arteta gone. If we hadn't had so many injuries, the second and the 3 red cards, Chris, you forget the other one, and no other team has, of course, been punished for what we've been punished for, we'd also have more points. Love Me Forever in the chat says, why is it that we find excuses for Arteta, but other managers come in one season and change a club around and win a trophy? And of course, this is the misconception that a lot of fans have, the mistake a lot of fans make, is that they look at Liverpool and Slot, or they look at Chelsea and Maresca, and on one side you've got the people that say, look, they've changed managers and look what they're doing, completely ignoring, of course, the bigger picture about both of those clubs. The fact that Liverpool have been, other than Arsenal, but over the last 6 to 7 years that Man City have won 6 of the last 7 titles, Liverpool have been majorly the main title contender. Only in one of the 2 seasons that Arsenal competed for the title were Liverpool not in the frame. That was the 22-23 season, where they finished in a really poor place because of injuries. Liverpool had a really bad injury reality in 22-23, and they paid the price for that with their finish during that season. And yeah, of course, Klopp stayed, and the following season they had a much better shot at winning the title. And of course, they've built on that again, and this season they're going again. But obviously, that people describe it as excuses. You often see that word come up, though. The word excuses comes up a lot for people that are very critical of Arteta. This word is often used to try and dismiss people with a genuine point of view or opinion when they bring up reasons, and they are reasons as to why Arsenal are where they are ultimately in comparison. Liverpool and Chelsea are not in phase 1. That's a lot of the misconceptions that people have about their situation. If you're looking at just the manager point of view, of course, is the first phase of Arne Slot and Maresca's eras with their respective clubs. But in the greater context of those clubs, they're nowhere close to phase 1. Liverpool are in, I wouldn't even describe them as in a phase process right now. Liverpool have been a dominant force in English football for the last 5 years and have been competing with Manchester City, bar those one season we talked about due to injury, and have also been in a position where Arne Slot has inherited such a brilliant squad. And then Maresca's come in, and while everyone was, to a degree laughing at Chelsea, they still finished in 6th place under Pochettino after just one season and have spent well over $1 billion in just a few, I think not even a few seasons on players, has now got a manager that, of course, has one season of experience or a couple of seasons of experience in the Championship with Leicester, and has, of course, now taken on that role. And the biggest irony, as I continue to point out, is that all those people that have been calling for Arteta's head for quite some time would have lost their minds if it was Maresca or Slot being picked as Arteta's successor. Paul says, Tom, how's that Kai Havertz is our 20-plus goalless year striker thing working out? We told you he wasn't good enough. Can you finally admit it? Paul dropping in a super chat just to make sure that I read out a comment. I mean, we talked about Kai Havertz a hell of a lot. We've talked about the fact that in this period of time, the expectations of him as a player have, of course, changed. And, of course, the signing of Kai Havertz was never, ever designed to be Arsenal's centre-forward for the long term. As we've talked about, as Paul may have missed and chosen not to listen to, we've talked about the fact that Arsenal's striker department has been something that we've always wanted to see improve. That's why we've had discussions about Alexander Isak on the channel for a number of years, prior even to Arteta's signing of Havertz. It's why we talked about Victor Gyökeres on the channel. It's why in the summer we talked about Benjamin Šeško. It's why we've had a number of conversations about potential strikers that we have signed. But Paul, I'd take the blinkers off, mate, and maybe look at the bigger picture of what we talked about. When you get focused on one individual point that bothers you so much to pay me, so I read out your opinion, I guess that probably says more than the question does itself. Farouk says Arteta has won a high-pressure match, has not won a high-pressure match in the last 2 years. Dropping points at West Ham, Villa, Southampton, Fulham. He cannot win in the pressure games or when it matters. Some people would say I shouldn't give these opinions the airtime. And I empathise with people that say that because, you know, when people leave these comments that are obviously blatantly crackpot, let's be honest, they're just crackpot theories, because despite the fact that, you know, Arteta has beaten Manchester City, he's beaten Liverpool, you know, he's beaten these teams, he's won away in the North London derby, ended that run that we had going since 2014, that he managed to end the record at Old Trafford that we'd not won in the league there since 2006, that, you know, in big times of high pressure moments, you know, be that in Champions League games, you think about the Porto game at home, you know, first time reaching a Champions League quarter-final in 14 years. Despite those instances, despite high-pressure matches like Arsenal being held to the final moments of games, like the Bournemouth game, think about the Brentford game, thinking about even this season, the Leicester game, you know, and these high-pressure moments that Arsenal are expected to win and are currently not, that after all of those examples, of course, there are still people out there that choose, and it is a choice. It's not, it's nothing to do with kind of like bad memory. It's nothing to do with any kind of shortcomings mentally. It is a choice. It's a choice to forget and ignore those instances, those games. And it's a choice to ignore what has happened, what has been done. To suggest that Arteta has never won a high-pressure game in the last 2 years, despite beating Manchester City in these last 2 years, despite beating Liverpool in these last 2 years, despite winning these North London derbies, despite these high-pressure matches, despite the fact that in the second half of last season, we won every league game bar 2, which was a draw at Manchester City and that home defeat to Aston Villa, despite all of those games not being apparently high pressure, people will still generate these crackpot opinions because they choose to ignore things that have happened, and that is ultimately the reality. Mr. Thugi says, just on the side note, we should really consider resting Timber tomorrow. He's been playing a lot of games recently, and I worry that he is going to get injured. I think I share your concerns, and we need to find a way of resting him. But when we've got both our other two right backs, Tomiyasu and Ben White, out, it does create a really, really big concern. Joshua says, hi, Tom. Who would you sign in midfield if Partey and Jorginho leave? Of course, Martin Zubimendi comes to mind, but for me, I want to see Declan Rice moved into the number 6 position. So we're looking more so at a player that can cover at 6 and 8 again. And I'm not sure Zubimendi is indeed that player. We need to find somebody that can offer that. I think Baleba at Brighton is a really good profile at the moment that's really impressing at Brighton, and someone that I think the club should certainly be keeping an eye on in terms of how he's performing at the club, because I think he's doing really, really well. So Baleba, I think, will probably be up there with a potential choice as well. Farouk says, I'm talking about taking advantage of the league title or putting pressure. As I talked about, Farouk, end of last season, second half of last season, we won every single game bar 2 league matches. That draw at City and the home defeat to Aston Villa, the only times we dropped points in the league in the entirety of the second half of the season in 2024. I mean, I don't know if that's not taking advantage or what. I have no idea how on earth anyone could not think that it's people have short memories, or they just choose, I think, in this case, to ignore them. Joey says, Porto last season was also a high-pressure situation in the second leg, and I think we also won that game. We absolutely did. CJ Dan says, is Kivior the slowest defender we've ever had? There was a moment on Sunday where it looked like he was carrying a fridge freezer. As we know, that he equaled the record, was it, over the 40-metre distance? So, no, clearly not. Kivior was not that. John says, with both Trossard and Martinelli not performing on the left-hand side, is it not time to give Sterling an extended run in his favoured position? Otherwise, what's the point of him being there and not getting minutes? I don't think so, John. I understand where you're coming from, but every time I've seen Sterling play, it's been worse than Trossard and Martinelli. I really struggle with that. I feel as though there's this opinion of players that you are at your best when you're not playing. And I think Tierney has that right now. I think Sterling gets that. You are at your best in a fan's mind when you're not playing because you're the other option. And that, I think, sometimes can skew how we look at that. AK says, why can we not give Arteta more time? The SAF, Sir Alex Ferguson, took years to build a dynasty at Manchester United. He solidified their place in the footballing map. It's nuts, isn't it, that we're having these conversations about Arteta? Especially because obviously people don't really have an answer as to who they would bring in as a replacement, and often either say there's loads out there without being able to name them, or of course that it's not their job to pick who indeed should replace Arteta. I genuinely think it's nuts. I think it's nuts to want Arteta gone, because to have put Arsenal into the position that they are now, of where they were. I saw a tweet. I think it was a Manchester United fan. Let me find it. Let me find the tweet. It was peppering my timeline yesterday. I think it was a Manchester United fan saying something along the lines of like, while he banters Arsenal fans. Here it is. Ryan Haber. I mean, it was from that account called The European Lad, one of those classic teenagers running an account with like 200,000 followers, said this month marks 5 years of Arteta as Arsenal manager. Should he be considered a success or a failure on those 5 years? And the person who tweeted it, Ryan Haber, who is a content creator for Horizon Union and a Manchester United fan, he said, I'll banter Arteta all the time, but if you actually think he's a failure, you're just an idiot. He's built a squad that can go toe-to-toe with a alleged cheating Pep Guardiola for 2 to 3 years running. And whilst they haven't won it yet, I strongly believe they will soon. Only Klopp managed to consistently go toe-to-toe with Pep before. Ten Hag won 2 trophies with United, and whilst I thoroughly enjoyed both of those days, I would trade that just to have a young squad in a position to consistently compete at the top of the table for the foreseeable future like Arsenal have. Unfortunately, I think most want to call Arteta a failure because of vocal minorities of Arsenal fans on here, as in social media, and act as if they have been winning the thing for years, which has made them rather unbearable. Doesn't make Arteta a failure, though. And I think it was a really good assessment of Arsenal. Is people so quickly forget what Arsenal have been over the last, like the decade prior to Arteta taking over. This was and is the 5th year that Arteta is, of course, in the job at Arsenal. Come December, whatever it is, it will be his 5th year at the club. And this idea of whether Arsenal have been a success or a failure, if you think Arsenal have failed in the Arteta tenure, obviously it comes from having a different perspective on football, but it's a perspective that's never going to be satisfied, or you're never going to have an enjoyment of the sport in the same way that I certainly do. Because the idea that football can be so binary that a trophy defines whether a team is a success. I mean, was Ten Hag a success at Manchester United? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Ten Hag was an overwhelming failure at Manchester United, despite winning an FA Cup and despite winning a Carabao Cup, because ultimately Manchester United as a club regressed under Ten Hag, went backwards from the point of Solskjaer leaving and Ten Hag coming in, from the point of Mourinho going and this. They have regressed. They were finishing second under Mourinho. They finished second, I think, under Solskjaer during that time. Manchester United under Ten Hag have regressed, despite the fact that they picked up those 2 trophies. And it was an overwhelming failure of a tenure of a manager that will put him as a manager in worse stead. If you look at the stock of the coach from the point that they arrive to the point that they leave, Ten Hag's stock as Ajax manager, taking them to a Champions League semi-final, helping to create one of the most surprising, entertaining and successful developmental groups in Europe, to being a manager who is now simply and nothing more than a laughing stock come the end of his time, who just makes excuses, who has no accountability, that never takes ownership for anything that went wrong during his time with the club. And you look at the stock of Arteta from the point of being an inexperienced, never managed a club before, to now being considered one of Europe's best young coaches, who, if he was to leave Arsenal, would without a doubt be considered for some of the top jobs in this footballing sphere. That's the difference between the job that Ten Hag has done at Man United and the job that Arteta is doing, and the appreciation for both of those coaches. And that's the reality. And I think that also what Ryan's tweet highlights is a scenario at the moment in social media where there's a lot of kind of focus on the rivalry online between fans. There's a lot of Arsenal fans that are a bit fed up and a bit sick and tired of being laughed at or being bantered by their rivals, be that Chelsea fans, Man United fans, Liverpool fans, the rare few City fans that you can find that, were born in 2018. That's rare that you ever find that. But that's, I think, the biggest thing at the moment for Arsenal fans is they're a bit tired and sick of being bantered. They're a bit tired of being the butt of the joke because they've not won the league. Whereas I'm not fussed about that. I couldn't care less what a Man United fan or a Liverpool fan or a Chelsea fan thinks about Arsenal. I'm very focused on Arsenal. are very focused on what we're doing. And I believe personally that what Arsenal have done over these last 5 years is taken ourselves back into a position again. We have a far greater chance of winning the title, a far greater chance of being in a position where we could win the league. Whereas prior to Arteta's arrival, I didn't have that for a decade and a half. After we won the league in 2004, we were, again, so far off the title. We threatened towards the end of the 2010s in one season, and ultimately our title run was ended by, ironically, injuries. We've never come anywhere close to being as to where we are now. And the fact that people want to chuck that in, I want to roll the dice again, because they want to go back to a potential period where we're in where we're regressing, and we're not in the fold. Like, that, you're willing to roll the dice on that. I mean, fair play. You're riskier than I am. This comes from someone who doesn't, but yeah, it's really, really, really telling. So yeah, we'll wait and see. Paul says, Tom, whether Isak or Gyökeres are discussed is irrelevant. You said that Havertz was capable of 20 plus goals a season, based on what last season did. Thank you again, Paul, for the kind donation. I will certainly use that on. I might make a Havertz placard out of the investment in the channel today. I might get that put up behind us. So this season, of course, Kai Havertz has scored 9 goals in 21 games so far this season. So if we have a look at last season, how many games Havertz played for Arsenal, of course, during the 23-24 season, he played 51. So in those 51 games last season that he played, he is currently scored 9 in 20. What did I say? Was it 21? 9 goals so far in 21 games. So, Paul, let's do some quick maths, shall we? And let's see if we can prove you wrong live on stream, which we always enjoy doing. It's always a good thing when we use maths to prove a point. So everyone get your calculators out to have a look at what the trajectory so far of Kai Havertz's season is. So if we assume that he's going to play a similar number of games, those 51 games, of course, includes an FA Cup run that ended in the 3rd round when we got drawn against Liverpool. It includes a League Cup run that was ended in the 4th round, I think. Was that right? I think. 51 games, and of course a Champions League run that ended in the quarterfinals. So 51 games, despite ending the League Cup in the 4th round, the FA Cup in the 3rd round, he scored 14 goals in 51 games. So far this season, he has 9. So if we do 9, if we can work out what we can do is we can work out on average what his trajectory is by doing 9 divided by 21. That gives you a value of what his goal per game ratio is at the moment. So that comes out at 0.42. Now, if we times that just by 51, now I think he'll end up playing. Should he avoid injury? Should Kai Havertz avoid injury this season, I think he could play potentially even more than 51 games. But if we do that 0.42 times by 51 and we do the same number, you will see that that comes out at 21. So thank you, Paul, for this moment, because at the moment, Kai Havertz is on a trajectory to score 21.8. Let's round that up to 22. At the moment, Kai Havertz is scoring at a rate that will see him land 22 goals so far by the end of the season. So thank you, Paul, for proving my point. Manali Cream says, Tom, how would you view the Arteta regime if we finish top 4 over the next 2 seasons as well as this? He's undoubtedly been excellent, but I can understand the apprehension. If indeed Arteta was to finish in the top 4 without winning any more trophies in this and the next 2 seasons, obviously, as I've said before, and I'm very much well on record as pointing out, is that means that time for Arteta comes to its close. In this contract, we absolutely, without a question, need to look at a position of progression and where the ceiling is, and of course where we are, and where we are as a team. And looking at the next couple of years, I think this contract, as I say before, and I always get asked this, what does it take for Tom to want Arteta to be sacked? He has to deliver a trophy at the elite level in these next years, a title or a Champions League. An FA Cup is I don't think, enough to be able to justify that position longer than this contract. People may disagree, and that's fine. But I think at that point, it's probably enough evidence to turn around and say, this is as far as he can take us. So that's where my head is. That's where I'm at with this contract. That's where I'm at with Arteta. And that hasn't changed. Oh, Paul's changing the goalpost now. He wants Premier League goals. He wants Premier League goals now because remember his comment, which he very kindly dropped a donation in, says, you said that Havertz was capable of 20 plus goals a season based on last season. I don't see the word Premier League in there, Paul. Don't see the words Premier League in there at all. So we can all try and change the goalpost when we're made to look a little bit silly. I'm afraid that you've dropped the ball on that one. John says, despite scoring the most goals last year, I was worried about our forward line and reliance on Odegaard, and I have been proven right. Chelsea and Liverpool have much more firepower in reserve than we do. Yeah. You look at Chelsea's squad. We did a thing on this yesterday. So Arsenal's attacking options this season are basically the same as last season's, if we're being honest. The team that scored 90 scored a record number of Premier League goals for Arsenal is basically the same. Replace Sterling with Nelson, and you've got the same 6 players. Saka, Jesus, Martinelli, Trossard, Havertz, Sterling/Nelson. It's the same, right? So we have 6 attacking options who can play in those wide areas. You look at Chelsea's team, and you look at their squads, and you look at the players that they've got in their attacking options. They've got Mark Guy, they signed in the summer, 1. They've got Nicholas Jackson. They've got Joao Felix. They've got Noni Madueke. They've got Pedro Neto. They've got Jadon Sancho. They've got Mykhailo Mudryk. They've got Christopher Nkunku. And they've got Cole Palmer. They've got 9 attacking options. And if you combine all of the fees for that and compare that to what Arsenal's attackers cost, it's an absolute, it's a massacre in terms of the wealth of options from an attacking sense that Chelsea have got, of course, compared to Arsenal. Now, if you look at Liverpool's attacking options as well, they've added Federico Chiesa, of course, who sadly is I say sadly, he's not been available for them whatsoever so far this season. They've got Luis Diaz, Cody Gakpo, Mohamed Salah, Chiesa, of course, being the 4th, but who's been out. Darwin Nunez, Diogo Jota, and Harvey Elliott. They're the players, of course, that can play in those attacking 3. Elliott can, of course, also play in midfield. And that shows. It shows because those players, thankfully for them, on the most part, besides Jota, has been able to stay fit. Diaz, Gakpo, Nunez, and Salah stay fit. We can all say that Salah has, of course, been the biggest help. 15 goals and 12 assists in 21 games. Is showing you the quality that Mohamed Salah has brought to them this season. Salah is the difference. Salah is their Haaland. Salah is their Rodri. Salah is their Messi. Salah is their Cristiano Ronaldo. He is and I personally put Mohamed Salah in a category of player that is up there with Thierry Henry in terms of Premier League status. He has been that important to Liverpool. I wouldn't say he's better than Thierry Henry, but he's in that category. I don't think you could have much of a debate about Mohamed Salah being in that category of footballer. He's won the Premier League. He's won the Champions League with them. He's won countless other trophies with them. He's managed in 264 games to score 168 goals, playing in a wide position. And if you think about how many Premier League goals Thierry Henry scored was 174, Mohamed Salah is currently 6 goals away from Thierry Henry's Premier League goal scoring record, despite playing on the wing, despite only having played 10 more Premier League games than Henry. That's what we're going up against. We're going up against a Liverpool team that have got a brilliant wealth of depth of attacking quality and their own player that's in the similar level as that Thierry Henry. So that's what we're having to cope with as a club. That's what he's scored the same number of goals overall for. In fact, this is quite incredible. Just looking at this, for Liverpool, Mohamed Salah has played 370 games in total for Liverpool. 370 games. He has scored 226 goals. I'm looking at Wikipedia for this. It gives you kind of a big, broad thing. So it was not entirely accurate. I apologize, but it's usually pretty good. So in 370 games, Mohamed Salah has scored from the wide position 226 goals. Thierry Henry for Arsenal in 370 games scored 226 goals. They are tied in terms of games and goals. And Salah, of course, not playing as a striker. And that's what Arsenal are up against. We are up against a player that's in the same category as Thierry Henry. And I wish I had the assist numbers for them as well across those games. I don't. I'd be very curious. Thierry Henry created a lot of goals as well, but so, of course, does Salah. It was a brilliant moment where Roy Jennings was put to bed in a recent Sky debate when talking about Salah, where it was said to him about kind of David Beckham and comparisons with David Beckham in terms of in terms of Salah as well. And it was just a glorious moment where where he was completely destroyed by Neve Pedruziello, who talked about how Salah is closing in by just, I think he's 4 at that time. He was 4 or 5 away, of course, as well from that record. So it's nuts. 101 assists, says Sammy. I don't know what Henry's assist tally was either, but that's what we're up against. And RM says, I don't know how Liverpool fans don't have Salah down as their best ever player. Well, Liverpool have had some amazing players down the years, and you think about the modern era, and Steven Gerrard, of course, in there. But you have to go back to the eras where Liverpool were winning season after season after season. Back in the 70s, back in the 80s, where they were just so dominant as a football club. So that's also why it comes in. Carl says Henry had 93 assists, so less. It's if there's a debate where a Liverpool fan wants to sit down with an Arsenal fan and discuss who is the better footballer, Thierry Henry or Mohamed Salah, you can have a genuine debate about that. Now, I think overall, of course, Thierry Henry played 813 games, scoring 366 goals. But Salah's not done yet, and he's played 622 games and scored 303 goals. So it's without a question debate. For me, Thierry Henry is the better player, and he played in an era of football that I think was tougher, and I think defenders were better defenders back then, and that context, of course, creates a difference in the discussion and the debate, which means for me, Thierry Henry is without a doubt the better player. But it's definitely something that somebody could sit down and have a debate about. But the whole point of this discussion about the Henry Salah thing is it's showing you what Arsenal are up against. It's showing you what Arsenal are facing. It's showing you that Arne Slot and what he's inherited. You imagine if Arsenal had a player of Mohamed Salah's quality that Arteta could inherit in the prime years of his career when he joined the club, after already challenging and competing and winning titles in Champions Leagues. Would have been great. Carl says it's criminal to rate Hazard high. Eden Hazard cannot lace Salah's boots. And I hate Chelsea as a football fan, as an Arsenal fan. I can't stand them. And I really, really like Eden Hazard as a footballer. Like, genuinely one of my favourite players of the Premier League era. But it's not even close. Like, it's not close between Hazard and Salah. It's just not anywhere near a debate. It's not a discussion. If I wish Real Madrid have gone to Liverpool and bought Salah over Hazard, 100% would have rather they had gone in and spent the money on signing Salah. It would have been a much better signing for them than Hazard proved to be. But and I'd really like Eden Hazard as a footballer. But it's not even close. And this is kind of the whole point about the comparisons between Chelsea and Arsenal and Liverpool, is that Liverpool's squad and team and attacking options compared to Arsenal's, it is better. And it is more established, and it has got more experience at that level, and it has been more fortunate this season in terms of availability than Arsenal's have. Arsenal have lost Saka, they have lost Ødegaard, and that's it. Love Me Forever says, I just miss a trophy, Tom, just to rub it back in the Man United faces. Look, I know people want the trophies, and I can't begrudge anybody for being down or frustrated or annoyed at the fact that Arsenal haven't picked up those trophies. I can't begrudge anybody for that. I can begrudge them for ignoring. I can begrudge people like Farouk in the chat for turning around saying Arteta has never won a high pressure game in 2 years. These people are just, burying their head in the sand and believing what they want to believe and choosing what they want to believe. But I can't begrudge anybody for wanting to win those trophies. I want to win those trophies. But I kind of just take a different view of and recognize what sport is, and know that it's not preordained. No one's entitled to those trophy wins. No one is. So let's wait and see what happens. And also, of course, we saw news yesterday about the Manchester City case that's ongoing, and that we're expected to get more insights on that in the coming year. And the result of that whole investigation, I think, will add even more context to the last 2 seasons for Arsenal as well, where perhaps we get a better idea of what else Arsenal were going up against in the last 2 seasons. Let's wait and see. let's wait and see what the outcome of that investigation is. But if it does turn out that there are potentially things that, that people are alleging right now, that hypothetically, if they turn out to be true, it will add a different edge to those last 2 Arsenal seasons. It will add a different edge to the conversation about those last 2 seasons as well. So, yeah. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for tuning in. Really appreciate your time as always. Do drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel. We'll be back with you tomorrow morning ahead of the game against Monaco. Mikel Arteta's press conference is later on this afternoon. We'll be just discussing all of the outcomes from that press conference. And then looking ahead to the game against Monaco, which if Arsenal win, they're putting themselves in a really good position to finish, of course, in the top 8 of the league phase as well. Thank you so much, as always. Do drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new. And if you want to leave me a question with a super chat that allows me to do some maths and prove you wrong live, I always enjoy that. So please feel free to do that next show. See you soon. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy, and as always, respectful and up the Arsenal.